All right, man, we're in chapter 5, Matthew. So we've been looking at what we call Jesus in his own words. And, man, we're just slow rolling through Matthew 5, 6, and 7. We're just going to kind of be in it. Not sure how long it's going to take us to get through this. I'm excited about this journey for several reasons. One, because, not that Jesus' words in the scriptures are any more powerful than any other word that was in there, because it's his from beginning to end, right? We know that. It's just encouraging to kind of draw down and just to hear the heart of God himself when he was encased in flesh. And so, and to see this world through his eyes, right? That's kind of what we get to do as we walk through his life. And I love this. I love the fact that God walked among us. And, if you've ever just taken the time to read one of the Gospels themselves, right, just read through it. Or if you've even tried to collect them together, I have a book called I forgot what it's called now, but the Interwoven. It meshes all the scriptures together. So it's not like a harmony where they're side by side. It's like you just kind of filled in the gaps. And, man, it reads like a novel. And I love reading that. It sits on my desk. I find myself drawn to that because I want to fall more in love with Jesus. I want to know, and I want to imitate him. I want what he's got. I want to be that, and he's called us to be that. And so we know the whole story of the depravity and devastation of mankind when in Adam we all sinned, right? We know that, and we saw the devastation of it. And we saw that it didn't take that long before God said, I'm even sad I made man. Yet there was that grace, right? As he gave that world Abraham, Noah, a righteous man, who would build an ark at day and preach while he was doing it, that anybody was passing by, he would proclaim that there is a Savior and that there is a way out of this mess. Though no one accepted it, the offer was there. Then God called Abraham and wanted to walk with Abraham and make of Abraham a great nation, and that through him all nations would be blessed. And so we watched as God moved among Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and the 12, right? The 12 tribes. And we saw the power of that. Yet we saw the rebellion of them. And even in that, God was faithful to them. And God would meet their needs there. And God wanted to be their king, but they wanted another one, so he gave them one. And then he gave them David, where the house of David was like the benchmark from that point on of what it looked like to have a nation that loved God. Yet even in that, they didn't love God. Even the king who was after his own heart didn't love him more than sex with outside of marriage, right? And so we see those kind of things, the disappointment. Yet in all of that, God was faithful. Yet they continued to turn their back on him, and they continued to rebel so that the nation fell into disrepair. And by the time Jesus shows up on the scene, this nation is a wreck. There is no nation. It is what once was. It's like we think of Rome today. It was, but it's not. It may have been great in one time, but it was no longer the greatness because they had rebelled against God. So they were under the thumbprint of Rome, and Rome ruled them. Though they wanted to feel like they were still ruling themselves, they knew they weren't. And so you had the scribes and the Pharisees, and they would run around trying to act like they were some important thing, but there was no king. They had no king. They had nothing. They had a religious elite. That's all they had. They had fake kings. They had mock kings, Herod and some of the others, but they were just appointed by Rome to do their bidding. These were not God's men. These were just man's men to make them feel important. Yet God is relentless in his love. And he knew that was going to take place. And so through the lips of Isaiah, a prophecy came true. And a child was born unto them. And upon his shoulders, everything would rest. And he would be that lamb that would become a sacrifice. Not one that they knew that when they sacrificed to God through the priest, that it was temporary. They knew that. It was just a kind of a pass, right? It was a delayed sentence. They knew that they were going to have to do this again and again and again. And that's a helpless state. God said, I'm going to send a once-for-all sacrifice, right? But to do that, it had to be the spotless lamb, all right? Because that's how God would not allow one that was blemished to be sacrificed to him. And even in that, those dirtbags were making money off of that. So they would tell you when you came to the temple that your animal was blemished, and they would sell you one out of their pen. So then they could charge you money. And then they would take yours and they would cover up those blemishes and put it in the same pen that you just got one that was, and this was their racket. And this is what you need to know so that when Jesus shows up and he turns over the table, this is why. Because you've turned this thing into a racket and it was never meant to be that. And so the sacrificial lamb was also a warrior lamb, right? The lamb as he first set foot on this place. And so here he is, though. For 30 years he had grown up just with his eyes open, looking at how the world was, right? And he would even challenge the priests and the teachers at 12. You remember the story, right? I mean, we know these things, and so he did that, and so he lived among. And then at the baptism, it was powerful there what took place, and so from that point on, he was outed, and they knew there was something different about this man. And so we find ourselves now where Jesus first gives us our record. He may have said a lot more before this. This is the first kind of mass sermon that he gave to the people at large. Now, he had healed, and he had done miracles, and people had seen them, and so he's created quite a stir. He was a traveling roadshow, so to speak, and there were those who only wanted to follow him because he did things for them. There were others that were thinking, man, I remember my grandfather telling me about a Messiah that was to come. And I remember reading in the sacred text about Isaac, and I remember King David saying there would be one who would sit on his throne whose rule would never end. And I wonder if maybe he's that, right? So you get the crowd that's going on and what's happening there. And so you've got these people who are hungry for that because Rome has been beating them down and stealing them blind through people like Zacchaeus and Matthew and others. And you have the Pharisees and Sadducees and scribes who are taking advantage of them religiously and telling them that they needed to tithe more and they needed to give more and they needed to behave more. And so they're just trying to find relief, right? This is the setting behind this story. I'm going to read it to you in the Message. I know that is not as theologically correct and accurate according to the words and the literal interpretation of things, but it gives us a great dramatization of this story before we examine it in the original intent of the language. But I just want you to hear this. Let me get there. We're just going to read because you've heard this. We're coming to a new section, and I just want us to see it before we launch into that. When Jesus saw his ministry drawing huge crowds, he climbed a hillside. Those who were apprenticed to him, the learners, the disciples, the committed, they climbed with him. Arriving at a quiet place, he sat down and he taught his climbing companions. But then the crowds had also gathered because they too were desirous of seeing his greatness. And this is what he said. You're blessed when you're at the end of your rope. With less of you, there's more of God and his rule in your life. You're blessed when you're lost and you've lost what's most dear to you. Only then can you be embraced by the one most dear to you. You're blessed when you're content with just who you are. No more, no less. That's the moment you found yourselves the proud owners of everything that can't be bought. You're blessed when you've worked up a good appetite for God. He's food and drink and the best meal you've ever eaten. You're blessed when you care. At the moment of being careful, you find yourselves cared for. You're blessed when you get your inside world, your mind and heart put right. Then you can see God in the outside world. You're blessed when you can show people how to cooperate instead of compete or fight. That's when you discover who you really are and your place in God's family. You're blessed when your commitment to God provokes persecution. The persecution drives you even deeper into his kingdom. Not only that, count yourselves blessed every time people put you down or throw you out or speak lies about you to discredit me. What it means is that the truth is too close for comfort, and they're uncomfortable. You can be glad when that happens. Give a cheer even. For they don't like it, I do. All heaven applauds. And know that you are in good company. My prophets and witnesses have always gotten into this kind of trouble. Let me tell you why you're here. You're here to be salt seasoning that brings out the God flavors of this earth. You lose your saltiness, how will people taste godliness? You've lost your usefulness and will end up in the garbage. Here's another way to put it. You're here to be light, bringing out the God colors in the world. God is not a secret to be kept. We're going public with this, as public as a city on a hill. If I make you light bearers, you don't think I'm going to hide you under a bucket, do you? I'm putting you on a light stand. Now that I put you there on a hilltop, on a light stand, I need you to shine. Keep open house. Be generous with your lives. Be open to others. You'll prompt people to open up with God, this generous Father in heaven. Don't suppose for a minute that I have come to demolish the Scriptures, either God's law or the prophets. I'm not here to demolish, but to complete. I came to put it all together in a vast panorama. God's law is more real and lasting than the stars in the sky and the ground at your feet. Long after stars burn out and earth wears out, God will be alive and working. Trivialize even the smallest item in God's law, and you'll only have trivialized yourself. But take it seriously, show the way for others, and you'll find honor in the kingdom. Unless you do far better than the Pharisees in the matters of right living, you won't know the first thing about entering the kingdom. That is the message. I like the way it reads. It's just good. It makes you, doesn't it? It just makes you, it's like a call. All of a sudden you kind of straight up and go, I should be better, right? I mean, there's something that it makes you feel like, hey, let's do this thing, right? And so this is where we are. And so we are gonna be in I don't know what version I'm in right now, but we're gonna be in verse 21. And he's beginning a series where he's going to say, you've heard that it was said, but I say to you. All right? This is where it gets really uncomfortable for the Pharisees who may have climbed up that hillside that day, because they're the ones who have been saying what he's getting ready to turn on them. And so this is, I mean, I just want us to see and understand how powerful this was. These people have gathered there simply because they wanted to be healed. Or they had a son maybe that was a demoniac or whatever, or they just had some needs and they just wanted them met. And he looks at him and says, man, you want to know who the joyful people are? You want to know the people that have joy that they can't even contain? And he begins to describe them. And you can imagine that within them is this thing that's welling up going, seriously? Because I always thought that I was weak. I always thought that I should be something different. But you're telling me that these feelings of inadequacy that I have isn't a bad thing? And the fact that I'm on this hillside to hear you is a good thing? I mean, all of a sudden it's like it's a whole new world for them. And so then he says, listen, and you know what else? You're the salt of the earth, and you're the light of the world. Man, that's good news, isn't it? Now, that was to a nation. It is to us through that nation, right? Because through that nation, all nations will be blessed. So though Israel was to be a light, their light had grown out. Though they were to be salt, they had become just like the world, right? And that's the problem with the church today. We've tried so hard to be like the world that we're not even a light anymore. We don't even add value or taste to the world anymore because we've so become just like them. That's where Israel was. And so God's calling them back to their greatness, to say there's still hope. Don't let that saltiness go away. Dust off the shade of that lamp so that it shines bright. Turn the wick. Get it where it ought to be, right? This is what he's saying. And so he's saying to you and to me, I mean, it's undeniable, right? I mean, I know the context of who he's talking to. But as he talks that, the application to you and me is that we have internally joy unspeakable, right? There's not one thing this world can do to steal your joy. Because it's not about what's going on outside us, right? We're not trying to climb ladders. We know who we are. We know that outside of Christ, we're nothing, right? Now, the world doesn't like that. The world doesn't like us saying that. A lot of people left the church because they got tired of being beat down and told they were scum. They didn't want to hear that anymore. If you don't start with the bad news, you can't appreciate the good news. But that's where the progressive church that you're going to hear rising up, that's what they didn't like about what was being told. They didn't like the hellfire and brimstone. They didn't like the fact that they were dirty, rotten, stinking sinners in need of Christ. They don't like that. You just listen to them talk. This is who they are. I'm grateful that God. Listen, I don't like that message either. Until you realize you are that. And then you go, okay, well, now play the game then. I'm going to act like I'm not that. And then you realize you can't fix it. And so I'm just grateful that I'm what they call poor in spirit. I know, right? And you can't hurt me that way. You can't knock me off a pedestal that I hadn't put myself on. And that's what he's saying here, right? And so if we were to go through those Beatitudes, we would see that every one of them describes the humility of mankind, that at their core, that's who God has called us to be. And so then he says that we're to be the light and the salt. And that's why we go to work, isn't it? I mean, I go to work to make money and be faithful to my family, but I go to work too to be salt and light. Man, if I had to go to work just to make $1, I don't like my job. I'm just going to tell you. I mean, I'd rather find a million other things to do. But I realize that I'm in a diverse group of people when I walk onto that stone yard. And there's some people there that need Christ, and there's some people there that have Christ and need encouragement just like I do. And so when I walk in there, I get to be salt and light, if I choose to. And I choose to, most days. And then he says, listen, let's talk about righteousness. Because this is the other problem that we get into, right? He didn't call us to play the game. He didn't call us to act like we've got it right? To be the teacher's pet and to let everybody know that, look at me, I look really good on the outside, It's not that. That's why he says, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees. Because we already know what he thought about them, don't we? I know I feel like I'm redundantly saying the same thing, but it's important that we hear this. He said, you're like whitewashed tombs. You look pretty when you go to a cemetery, but if I would crack open that tomb right there, ain't nothing but just dead, decayed mess in there. Right? And he says, you're like those bowls, they're all clean on the outside. Look really pretty on the outside. But you go try to use it, and it's full of crusty, moldy, used up food that's good for nothing. So that's who you are. And so he says, listen, unless your righteousness is better than just the outward aspect of things, you're not going to see the kingdom of heaven. You know what? It's interesting because we understand grace and we understand that we don't merit our salvation and we don't work, right? Yet when Jesus comes, what does and he separates the sheep from the goats, on what basis did he do that? It wasn't any outward activity they did necessarily. It was all inward, wasn't it? They cared for the poor. They visited those in prison. They did those things. There was a heart deal that was going on. Jesus says, depart from me. I don't know you. That was the point. See, the Pharisees didn't know him. They did all the stuff that he wanted in that sense in an outward deal. But there was no relationship that drew them anywhere. And so that was what he just finished saying. Unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. Today, he begins to say, let me explain to you what that looks like. Okay? And so here we are, chapter 5, verse 21. He says, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder. And anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you, anyone who's angry with his brother or sister will be subject to judgment. What did he do right there? He took what they thought was an outward activity, right? Murder. Because, hey, I don't know all you well enough. I don't think any of you have murdered anybody in this room. It's possible, but I don't think so. But that doesn't let us off the hook of the 10 Commandments. It says, thou shalt not kill, right? Because he's saying, that's what the Pharisees think. It's not about that. Do you hate your brother? Do you hate? Are you angry? Are you mad? Are you, seriously? If you're doing that, you're just a whitewashed tomb. This is where it's getting hard, right? And so this is what he's doing, and this is what he wants us to understand. Now in Genesis 9:6, right? We know what he says there about murder. Let me read it to you. Whoever sheds human blood, by humans shall their blood be shed. Listen to this. For in the image of God has God made mankind. There's something sacred. And I've been studying this more so than I probably have studied anything, the image and likeness of God. One verse in the very beginning of the scriptures, yet you'll see it all the way through. And here's the thing. Every person that you look at is to be respected and dignified because they are made in the image and likeness of God. It has nothing to do whether they're following the God who made them. Know that. He says it here, and he says it in other places, right? It's not about that. If you are breathing, you are worthy of being treated with dignity. This is the power of the scriptures here. I don't have a right to be angry and mad and slander and hate someone who doesn't agree with me on political issues or really spiritual issues or any of those other things. It doesn't mean we don't have opinion. It just means that I'm not going to treat someone with indignity that way. You know, it's interesting. I listen to a lot of, I'm on social media a lot and I interact in a lot of conversations. What's interesting to me is the people that came out of kind of a pagan background and all of that, they never felt the hate that they felt when they came out of that. They said it was, you know, when I was all up in the homosexual aspect of things, everything was cool. But the minute that I decided I didn't want to participate in that anymore, I've never felt more unloved and hated than I've ever felt right now. Not the church never made me feel the way the world does when I flip sides. It's an amazing thing, really, when you think about it. And so I think it's, and I'm not picking on that one sin. I'm just saying that's the prevalent one right now. But this is the thing. We should be not allow the world to have the corner of the market on love and not being angry and being patient and being kind and being right. That's us. And this is what he's saying here. You don't have the privilege as a Christ follower to walk around and start going, I hate you, you make me mad, I'm angry with you, God's angry. We don't have that right to do that. But I know, and if we're not careful, we're all guilty of that. But this is what he's saying. Taking a life is an assault on the sacredness of the image of God. And so is being angry with those same people. This is really a convicting deal, isn't it? I mean, I got to tell you, I may not express it to some other people, but I'm angry. I'm angry when I see things. And I realize there's a righteous anger, but I'm telling you, what he's saying to you and me here is we should be more like him, who was patient, right? You don't think he loved the people that he knew he was going to bring that flood on? He did. Everything they did was evil, always, only, continuously. That's what he says in Genesis chapter 6. Nevertheless, their days shall be 120 years. And so he sent Noah to preach the gospel to them, a preacher of righteousness. So this is how he did that. Christ did the same thing, right? You didn't see him angry with anyone other than those Pharisees who were disobeying the sacredness of God in his house of prayer. But he treated them with respect, though he was honest with them about things. But when he's laying on that piece of wood and they're driving nails into his hand, he says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. When he came out of the tomb, and every one of his disciples had run, fearful, disappointed, scared, and one of them even just began to call down curses on people for thinking that he was with them, how did Jesus respond? Hey, Mary, go tell the brothers I'm going to meet them in Galilee. Right? Not, hey, and tell them to get ready, strap on, because I'm going to beat them. That was none of that. And when he had that fish fry on the beach that morning with the disciples who had already, they said, I guess it's over, and they've gone back to doing their thing, right? And they gather up on that beach, and Jesus looks at Peter and says, hey, man, why don't you take a walk with me? He didn't beat him up over his denial, did he? He wasn't angry with him. See, this is what the church has forgotten, this thing. How do we be righteous? How do we call the wicked to righteousness and not be angry in that process? Right? Because it's easy to get angry and mad. I mean, I'm saying, I'm just confessing or whatever we're doing. It's hard. This world today makes you just want to see God just blast some people. That's not a healthy attitude. Because if he'd have done that back before I came to Christ, I'd be in trouble. So maybe I should just try and help woo people onto the ark, right? I mean, that's going to be my job. I'll let God sort everything else out. I don't know how this is playing out in your head, but I'm just letting you know what the scriptures say, and we just need to look at it today. So listen, let's just go through it really quick because it's an easy passage. We'd like to make it hard, but it's not. Don't suppose for a minute that I have come to demolish scriptures. Am I in the right one? Yeah, no. You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the court. And anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. This is powerful stuff. What's he saying? I mean, we can make sense of it. Now, we can make the word hell and say, well, that doesn't really mean hell like, eternal hell. That just means hell like you throwing out to the garbage heap, right? Because you'll hear people say that because it's talking about Gehenna and all that. That's cute and cozy and everything, and it makes really good sense. But nowhere in their day did they ever think about Gehenna as some garbage dump. That happened when a rabbi 1,200 years later decides to call it that. But they didn't know what Gehenna was. They didn't know Gehenna was the place where they sacrificed their children to the god of Moloch. And so when they spoke of the valley of Hinnom, they knew what that was. And so if he's ascribing that to this, then we understand he's saying, man, you're going to be judged just like they were, right? And Raka is a strange word. We have no idea what that means. It's just one of those words. Is an onomatopoeia when you have a word you don't know what it means, but it sounds like that's what that is. Raka. It's just garbage words. And he says, listen, you don't get the privilege of just trashing your brothers and sisters. You don't have that right. And you can't call people fool in the sense that the scriptures would speak of here. Not just fool. We say that a lot, But I mean, this is to actually call someone and believe someone is like a Neanderthal, that they are dirt. They're worse than the animals. They're lower than the animals, kind of thing. This is what he's saying. So then he gives us this. This is powerful. Therefore, because you're not supposed to do that, here's what I want you to know, he's saying. If you're offering your gift at the altar, now they all knew that. They all knew. They went and they laid their off, when they were poor, they gave the dove. If they weren't, they gave the goat. Whatever those offerings were, they would give it to the priest. He would slit it, the blood would drain, they would throw it on that altar, and there would be this fire constantly blazing. And he says, listen, if you're coming to that, and you're going to bring your sacrificial item to the altar, and you remember that your brother or sister has something against you. Now, that's an interesting phrase. Any way you slice that in the original language, you can't find who's at fault. It's just that there's something against each other. So the deal isn't if I go to the altar and I realize Samuel has done something to me, or I have done something to Samuel. The point is, it doesn't matter. The point is, I need to quit acting like I got it all together and lay my sacrifice there, which is a stench in God's nostrils if my heart isn't right with my brother. Doesn't matter whether he started it. I should be the one to finish it. And so he says, you're going to be reconciled. You hear that? God's saying, you and me will never be righteous with God if we can't figure this thing out. That's powerful. He says the same thing Peter does when he's talking about husband and wife. Live with your wife in an understanding way as with the weaker vessel so that your prayers won't be hindered. What's he saying? Hey, man, if you can't keep your relationship with your wife right, we're going to have issues. I'm not gonna deal with you until we deal with this. This is how God is speaking to the people here, and this is what he says. Therefore, if you're offering your gift at the altar, and there remember your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, and then come and offer your gift. Man, this is powerful. The burden is always on us to be right with each other. This is his point. What happens when you let anger stay there? It smolders, doesn't it? Turns into bitterness. Bitterness eventually turns into this boil. It's going to boil over, and two things are going to happen. You're either going to spit words of anger at people, or you're going to physically hit people. That's the deal. And the beyond that is actually murder, which is what he's talking about. There are steps that are wrong before you get to murder. Speech and pugnaciousness, that's where you hit people. Those are wrong. Before that, bitterness is wrong. Before that, anger is wrong. That's why he says, don't let the sun go down while you're angry. Anger is not a sin. Not dealing with it is the sin. This is powerful truth for you and me to grab a hold of and just realize it. We have to grapple with this. I have to grapple with this, right? And so this is what he says. Make it right. Settle matters quickly, he says, verse 25, with your adversary who has taken you to court. Do it while you're still together on the way, or your adversary may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and the officer may throw you into prison. I tell you the truth, you will not get out until you've paid every last penny. What's he saying there? Hey, let's just be as right with each other as we can. I am grateful what Paul adds to this. Paul says, be at peace with all men, as far as it depends on you, right? And I can't tell you the depths I've gone to try and make things right with people, and it's just not going to be. And I have to walk away going, I've done everything I can. You know, I've got people. A guy that probably taught me more about truth than anybody else doesn't even want to speak to me today. And but I'm at peace with that. I can't fix it. You know, I've got a guy that betrayed me and stole all kind of money and caused a bankruptcy and everything else in my life. And no one was interested in sitting down and having a conversation about it. So, all right, life goes on, right? I could tell you story after story about those kind of things. But then there were those that did come out good, right? Where things are right. You realize there was an issue, and then now it's not. And that feels good, doesn't it? See, this is who we are. This is who God's called us to be. This is what it means to be people of the kingdom. This is what it means to be children of light and salt. We're just different. We have a lot of work to do, don't we? I should quit saying we. I like to drag y'all into this, right? I have a lot of work to do to get things right here. But, man, what powerful truth. And so I'm glad you came by so we could talk about this today. We are going to celebrate Lord's Supper today. I'm grateful for that. And there is that warning there, too, isn't there? Yeah. And so let's just, let me pray for us. We're going to sing a song out of here, and then we're going to, so you guys online can do your thing, but we're going to celebrate supper together. Father, thank you for this truth that we've heard in your word and for the reality of it. Father, make it make sense to us in each of the specific individuals that we can all think about as we hear this message that come into our mind that we go, I should probably do something there. Father, give us wisdom to know what that looks like, that we don't just make this harder than it should be or stiffer than it should be, but we don't make it lighter or easier than it should be, that we would walk just as you have called us to do in this thing called grace. And so do that to us and for us, Father, and transform us to be people of light and salt. And we ask it in Christ's name. Amen.